The bell echoed through the hallways of Sagebrush Elementary, signaling the start of morning class. Outside, the Texas sun baked the playground, turning the dust gold and painting long shadows on the blacktop. In Mrs. Turner's fourth-grade classroom, kids buzzed with energy, sneakers squeaking and chairs scraping as everyone found their seats. Emma Brooks sat near the window, her notebook resting on her knees, a nervous flutter in her chest. She missed her mother so much it hurt. Sometimes she imagined her mom, Sergeant Jamie Carter, still standing tall in her army uniform, medal shining on her chest, whispering, "You're stronger than you think, honey." Most days, though, it felt like the world had forgotten Jamie's name, and the horse who'd stood beside her through the worst of it all. Today was show and tell, and the classroom was a flurry of excitement. Jacob flashed his new baseball glove, while Lucy showed off a locket from her grandma. Emma waited her turn, twisting a leather bracelet around her wrist, her hands clammy. When Mrs. Turner finally called her name, Emma's voice almost caught in her throat. "I brought something special," she said, standing up. "My Mustang, Valor, served with my mom in Afghanistan. He saved her life more than once." At first, the class went silent. Then, a snicker bubbled up from the back row. Dylan, the ringleader of the Mean Girls, elbowed her friend. The boys in the corner rolled their eyes, and even Mrs. Turner looked uncertain. "Come on, Emma. A horse can't be a soldier," Dylan said, tossing her blonde hair. "That's just a fairy tale." Emma's cheeks burned. "It's not a fairy tale. Valor's a real war horse, and my mom, Sergeant Carter, she—" Before she could finish, the laughter began, louder now. Even Mr. Pierce, the substitute teacher standing near the door, shook his head with a crooked smile. "Horses don't salute, Miss Brooks," he interrupted. "Are you sure you're not making things up to feel special?" The words stung sharper than a slap. Emma looked down at her hands. She remembered the stories her mom used to tell, about Valor running through gunfire, carrying wounded soldiers to safety, never flinching even when explosions shook the earth. She wanted to scream, to make them all believe her, but the laughter drowned her out. "That's enough," Mrs. Turner tried to say, but the giggles and whispers kept swirling. Emma blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall, but they pricked at her eyes anyway. She could see her mom's army photo, framed on her grandma's mantel, Valor's wild mane blowing in the wind beside her. She wanted to run, but her feet felt glued to the floor. So she stood there, heart pounding, and said quietly, "I know what's true, even if you don't believe me." Mrs. Turner frowned, glancing at the clock, clearly wishing for recess to come early. Emma grabbed her backpack, shoving her notebook inside, and hurried to the hallway, fighting to keep her composure. The laughter faded behind her, replaced by the sound of her own shaky breath. She stopped at the window near the nurse's office and pressed her forehead to the cool glass. The schoolyard looked empty and endless. For a moment, she wondered if she really was crazy, if all those nights spent brushing Valor's coat and whispering her secrets were just a kid's way of trying to fill the empty space her mother left behind. But then she remembered the medals in her grandma's closet, the Army-issue saddle with Sergeant Carter stamped into the leather, and the scar on Valor's shoulder where a bullet grazed him overseas. Those things were real. Her mom's sacrifice was real, and Valor's courage, unseen by everyone else in this town, was as real as the ache in her chest. Emma wiped her eyes, jaw set. She heard the door open behind her, and for a second she thought maybe Mrs. Turner or even Mr. Pierce had come to apologize. Instead, it was Jacob, awkward and red-faced, mumbling, "Sorry they laughed at you." Emma just nodded, unable to speak. She watched the kids pour outside for recess, the mean girls huddling in a circle, still giggling. She knew what they were saying. Emma the liar, the weird horse girl. She'd heard it all before, but she wasn't going to let them win. Not this time. After a minute, she walked to the water fountain, splashed her face, and took a deep breath. If her mom could face danger on the other side of the world, Emma could face a classroom full of bullies. She might have been alone in that hallway, but she wasn't giving up. Outside, the Texas wind swept across the fields, carrying the faintest scent of hay and freedom. Emma stared out at the horizon, imagining Valor running wild, hooves pounding, unbroken. She made a promise then, silent but fierce. She would prove the truth, no matter how hard it got. The day dragged on, the sting of humiliation never fading. But as the last bell rang, Emma walked home with her chin a little higher. She didn't know how yet, but she was sure of one thing. She wouldn't let anyone erase her mother's legacy, and she'd make the world see Valor for the hero he truly was. The next morning dawned crisp and clear over the little town of Sagebrush, the first hints of autumn rustling through the cottonwood trees. Emma hardly slept. She kept replaying the laughter, the jeers, the way her words had twisted in the air and fallen flat. She felt raw, wounded, but underneath the pain, a stubborn ember glowed. Her mother never backed down, and neither would she. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of bacon and black coffee. Caroline Brooks, Emma's grandmother, stood by the stove, her silver hair pulled into a ponytail beneath an old army ball cap. She glanced over as Emma trudged in, eyes red-rimmed from crying. "Rough night, kiddo," Caroline said, sliding a plate across the counter. Emma hesitated, then spilled everything. The laughter, the way the teacher had doubted her, the awful feeling that no one would ever believe the truth about her mother or Valor. Caroline listened without interrupting, her jaw tight, her gaze darkening as Emma described every hurtful detail. When Emma finished, Caroline's hands clenched into fists. "Those folks don't know what they're talking about," she said. "Valor's a hero, just like your mama. We're gonna show 'em, not just with words." Before Emma could ask what she meant, Caroline was out the door, phone in hand, making calls and muttering to herself. Emma watched her grandma's back, a familiar mix of hope and fear churning inside. Caroline was tough as Texas barbed wire, but sometimes her boldness scared Emma too. At school, the morning passed in a blur. Whispers followed Emma everywhere. Snickers in the hallway, pointed fingers at her locker. Even some teachers avoided her eyes. The ache in her chest grew heavier. She barely noticed the clock ticking toward recess, but out by the playground, something unusual was happening. Kids pressed against the chain-link fence, craning their necks. A low, rumbling sound grew louder, hooves pounding on the packed dirt. Suddenly, heads snapped around as a figure appeared at the edge of the schoolyard, a woman on horseback, tall and proud, her face set in a look that brooked no nonsense. It was Caroline, riding Valor, his black coat gleaming, his white star shining in the sun. He moved with a purpose, muscles rippling beneath the army blanket draped over his back. The scene froze. 100 pairs of eyes locked on the pair as Caroline swung down from the saddle, boots kicking up dust. She called out, clear and loud, "Excuse me, I'm looking for a class that needs a lesson in truth." Recess monitors hustled over, alarmed, but Caroline ignored them, leading Valor right up to the jungle gym where Emma's class clustered together, mouths agape. "Now, this here's Valor," she announced, voice ringing. "Sergeant Carter's partner, a horse who saw more action than most folks will in a lifetime. Emma, come here, honey." Emma hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, heart hammering as her classmates stared in disbelief. Caroline opened the saddlebag and pulled out an old, battered Army-issue saddle, medals glinting on the leather, military papers rolled tight in a weathered tube. She handed them to Mrs. Turner, who examined them with wide eyes. Caroline wasn't done. She gently tapped Valor's side, murmuring a command. The Mustang straightened, then, astonishing everyone, raised his front leg in a crisp salute, holding it steady. A gasp ran through the crowd. Valor held the salute, eyes focused and still, a living echo of discipline and courage. "See that?" Caroline said, glancing around. "This horse isn't just a pet. He's a veteran. He's got scars to prove it and stories to tell, if only you'd listen." For a moment, even the mean girls were speechless. The Army insignia on the saddle, the medals, everything shimmered with hard evidence. The teachers stared, mouths open, as Caroline explained Valor's training, the military records, and how he'd carried wounded soldiers across battlefields, earning honors alongside Sergeant Carter. Mr. Pierce, the substitute, shuffled forward, cheeks red. I had no idea." Caroline fixed him with a look. Most people don't, until they see it with their own eyes. Emma felt the ice in her chest thaw. Kids crowded around Valor, peppering Caroline with questions. Did he really go to war? Did he get shot? Did he save people? Emma answered as best she could, her voice growing stronger with each word, pride swelling in her heart. Mrs. Turner called for quiet, her own voice shaky. "Emma, I'm sorry. We were wrong not to believe you. Thank you for sharing Valor's story with us." Dylan, looking thoroughly chastised, shuffled over. "I guess I was kinda mean. Sorry, Emma." Emma smiled, just a little, and reached out to stroke Valor's mane. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel so alone. The whole schoolyard buzzed, whispers turning from ridicule to awe. Some kids even lined up to shake Emma's hand or touch Valor's nose. The principal, having hurried out to the commotion, quickly recognized the significance of the moment. He invited Caroline and Emma into his office, asking to see the documents and listen to more stories. He promised a school assembly to honor Valor and Sergeant Carter's service. As they left the playground, Caroline leaned down to Emma. "You see? The truth always finds a way, if you stand by it long enough." Emma looked up, sunlight glinting off Valor's medals. She wasn't just her mother's daughter anymore. She was the keeper of a story too important to forget. And now, finally, everyone could see it was real. That afternoon, as the news swept through town and Emma walked home beside her grandmother and Valor, she realized that sometimes all it took was a little proof and a lot of courage to change everything. By the end of the school day, news of what had happened on the playground had spread like wildfire. The story was too extraordinary to keep quiet. An Army Mustang saluting, medals gleaming in the Texas sun, and the granddaughter of a fallen hero finally believed. As Emma left the school building with Caroline and Valor, whispers followed her all the way to the sidewalk, but now the tone had changed. Kids who'd once giggled or looked away now watched her with curiosity and respect. By that evening, word had reached every corner of Sagebrush. The local diner buzzed with talk of Valor's salute, and the principal's phone rang off the hook. Parents wanted to know if the stories were true. Some even asked if their children could meet Emma's famous horse. For the first time in months, Emma felt a sense of pride she hadn't known she'd been missing. The next day, the principal called a special assembly in the school gymnasium. The bleachers were packed, not just with students, but with teachers, parents, even a few veterans from the VFW hall down the street. Caroline sat near the stage, her weathered hands folded tightly, eyes shining with a mix of nerves and pride. Emma stood in the wings, fidgeting with her bracelet, heart racing. The principal stepped up to the microphone. Today, we honor not just the memory of Sergeant Jamie Carter, but her remarkable partner, Valor, and her daughter, Emma Brooks, whose courage brought their story into the light. The applause was thunderous. Emma swallowed hard as she stepped up to the stage, Valor beside her, the Mustang's head held high. For a second, the noise and the faces blurred together, and she wished her mom could see this moment, could see the people finally listening, finally understanding. Emma's voice trembled at first, but as she began to tell Valor's story, how her mother had rescued him as a wild colt, how they'd trained together, survived together, saved lives on the other side of the world, the crowd grew silent. Emma spoke of the day her mom didn't come home, of the empty place at their kitchen table, and how Valor stood watch by the gate for weeks, waiting for a whistle that would never come. Halfway through, Caroline joined her on stage, carrying a letter in a faded envelope. She cleared her throat, holding the paper gently, and read aloud in a voice both steady and full of pain. Dear Mom and Emma, if you're reading this, it means I'm not coming back from this mission. But I want you to know Valor was there every step, just like he always promised. There were days when the world felt too heavy, when the desert winds threatened to bury us, but Valor never faltered. He ran through mortar fire, carried wounded soldiers to safety, and on the nights when hope was running out, he'd nudge me, remind me that courage comes in all shapes, even hooves and wild eyes. Take care of him, and take care of each other. I love you both more than words. Jamie, the words drifted over the crowd like a prayer. Tears sparkled on faces old and young. And for a long moment, no one spoke. Valor nuzzled Emma's shoulder, sensing her sorrow, and Emma reached up, fingers curling in his mane. Then the principal turned the microphone to Emma. Is there anything you'd like to say? Emma blinked at the sea of faces, so many waiting for her words. She thought of her mother, of bravery, loyalty, the power of truth, and she found her voice. I used to think being brave meant doing big, impossible things, Emma said. But sometimes it just means telling the truth, even when everyone laughs. My mom always said heroes aren't always the ones people notice right away. Valor was my mom's hero, and now he's mine. Thank you for believing in us. A fresh wave of applause broke out, echoing off the gym's high rafters. Reporters from the local newspaper snapped photos as the principal draped a ribbon around Valor's neck and handed Emma a certificate honoring her mother's service. After the assembly, the gymnasium became a swirl of conversation and congratulations. Veterans shook Caroline's hand and clapped Emma on the back. Mrs. Turner wiped her eyes, telling Emma, I'm so proud of you. I hope you'll forgive us for doubting. Even Dylan and her friends hung back, shamefaced but earnest. Dylan managed, I didn't know. I really am sorry. Emma just nodded, her anger replaced by something softer. Maybe it was enough that they understood now. The days that followed were a whirlwind. The story made the front page of the Sagebrush Gazette. Local news crews visited the Brooks Ranch, filming Valor as he performed his salute for the cameras. Neighbors brought casseroles and pies, sharing memories of Jamie Carter and telling Emma she was her mother's daughter through and through. A few days later, the town held a potluck in the park, and everyone showed up. Caroline brought Valor, and children lined up for a chance to pet the legendary Mustang. Veterans tipped their hats and shared stories of wartime courage, some for the first time in years. Emma felt wrapped in a blanket of belonging she'd never known before. As twilight fell, Caroline sat beside Emma beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the field. She handed Emma the letter again. "You gave this story back to the world," Caroline said, her voice rough. "Your mom would be proud." Emma squeezed her grandmother's hand, watching the stars wink on above. For the first time since her mother's death, the ache inside felt a little less lonely. Valor grazed nearby, metals catching the last rays of sun. Around them, laughter drifted through the air, blending with the steady rhythm of Texas crickets. Emma closed her eyes, letting it all soak in. She understood now. Her mother's story wasn't just about war and loss. It was about courage, truth, and the bond between a girl, her family, and a horse who'd seen it all. And tonight, surrounded by friends and neighbors, Emma finally felt at home. The celebrations faded, and Sagebrush slowly returned to its small-town rhythm. But life at the Brooks Ranch was forever changed. For Emma, the spotlight was both a relief and a new kind of weight. People now greeted her with respect and pride. But at home, quiet moments brought her back to the ache that never truly left. A longing for her mother that seemed to settle into the walls of the old farmhouse. Early mornings, Emma woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of chickens outside her window. Carolyn's voice floated in from the kitchen, calling her to breakfast. But there were days Emma barely touched her food, her gaze drifting to the empty seat at the table. Sometimes she thought she saw her mom's shadow in the hallway, just out of reach. It was strange how even good things, like Valor's fame, could make the absence feel sharper. Caring for Valor became Emma's ritual, her lifeline. Every afternoon, after homework and chores, she brushed his coat until it gleamed, talking to him about everything, her fears, her hopes, even the silly things that happened at school. The Mustang listened, his deep brown eyes warm and patient. He nudged her gently, as if he understood the language of grief. Caroline noticed the changes, too. She watched Emma with the wisdom of someone who'd survived her own losses. One chilly evening, as Emma sat on the porch steps, staring at the sunset, Caroline joined her with 2 mugs of cocoa. The fields stretched golden and quiet, the air thick with memories. "Your mama used to sit right there, you know," Caroline said, voice soft. "She'd talk about the future, about how she wanted to come home and teach you to ride bareback, just like her." Emma stared at her mug, silent. After a moment, she whispered, "Do you think she was scared? Over there, I mean?" Carolyn took a long sip before answering. "Everybody's scared, Emma. Brave folks just don't let it stop them. Your mom was scared plenty of times, but she always did what needed doing, especially for Valor." Emma thought about that, about the stories in her mother's letters, about the danger and fear she'd faced. It made her mom seem both larger than life and painfully human. That night, Emma found herself in the attic, drawn by a feeling she couldn't name. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight as she rummaged through boxes. Near the back, beneath a folded army blanket, she found an old leather-bound journal, her mother's name etched on the cover in neat block letters. Jamie Carter. Emma's breath caught. She sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the journal, hands trembling. The pages were filled with Jamie's looping handwriting, stories of long nights on patrol, tales of Valor's bravery, and reflections on home and hope. There were sketches of mountains, lists of names, even a pressed wildflower between 2 pages. One entry stopped Emma cold. April 14th, another dust storm tonight. Valor saved Private Lynn again, pulled him out from under the Jeep after the blast. I think sometimes Valor's braver than all of us. When I get scared, I remember Emma's smile. That's why I keep going. For her. For home. Emma pressed her hand to the page, tears falling before she could stop them. For the first time, she felt the connection between past and present, between her own heartache and the courage her mother had shown so far away. The days grew colder, leaves swirling across the ranch yard. Emma and Caroline fell into a gentle routine. Mornings filled with chores and school, afternoons with Valor, and evenings beside the fire, reading Jamie's journal aloud. Each story brought laughter, sometimes tears, but always healing. Sometimes, Caroline told her own stories, about Jamie as a child, wild and stubborn, always the first to climb a fence or ride a skittish colt. Emma listened, drawn into a world where her mother was not just a hero, but a daughter, a prankster, and a friend. One night, a thunderstorm rolled in, rattling the windows. Emma awoke to Valor's restless whinny from the barn. She pulled on her boots and dashed outside, rain soaking her hair. Caroline was already there, calming the Mustang. "It's just thunder, Valor," Caroline murmured, rubbing his neck. "Nothing's gonna hurt you here." Emma watched, heart swelling. She realized her grandmother carried her own grief, hidden beneath her strength. They weren't alone in missing Jamie. They shared it, and that made the pain bearable. After the storm passed, Emma crawled back into bed, clutching her mother's journal to her chest. She felt, for the first time, that maybe the ache in her heart could become something else, something like hope. Weeks passed. With each day, Emma grew stronger. She stood taller at school, smiled more easily, and found herself laughing with friends again. Valor's fame brought new faces to the ranch. Veterans, reporters, even children who just wanted to see the warhorse with their own eyes. Emma showed them Valor's medals, told them about her mom, and let them brush the Mustang's mane. But her favorite moments were still the quiet ones. Early morning walks with Caroline, silent conversations with Valor in the fading light, and late-night reading by the fire. The Brooks Ranch, once a place of sorrow, began to feel like home again. One crisp morning, Emma found herself writing her own stories in a new journal, determined to honor her mother's legacy in her own words. As she wrote, Valor grazed nearby, Caroline humming in the kitchen, and the sun rose over the Texas fields. Grief, Emma realized, didn't have to be the end. It could be the beginning of hope, of healing, and of a new chapter in the story her family had carried for generations. The quiet days on the Brooks Ranch were suddenly broken by a knock at the door one windy Saturday afternoon. Emma was in the yard, tossing hay to Valor, when she heard Caroline call her in. She dusted off her jeans and hurried inside, curiosity sparking in her chest. At the kitchen table sat a stranger, a woman in her 30s, with a sharp jaw, thick-rimmed glasses, and a notebook open in front of her. She looked up and smiled politely as Emma entered. "Emma, this is Ms. Tessa Lane," Caroline said, motioning for her granddaughter to sit down. "She's a journalist from Austin. She's been looking into your mama's last mission." Emma's heart skipped. Tessa extended a hand, her grip warm and firm. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by, Emma. Your mother's story, and Valor's, has gotten a lot of attention." But there are things about her final mission the public hasn't heard. I'd like to talk to you both, if that's all right. Caroline nodded warily. We don't mind answering questions, but Jamie's already been through enough. Her memory deserves respect. Tessa nodded, her eyes kind. Absolutely. That's why I'm here. The Army's official report on Sergeant Carter's final mission is, well, let's just say it's incomplete. There are gaps, files missing, and the few records I could find, well, some details don't add up. Emma's pulse raced. What do you mean? Wasn't she a hero? Tessa lowered her voice. I believe your mother was a hero. So does everyone I've interviewed from her old unit. But the Army's account is vague. Valor's role, your mother's acts of bravery, some of it's been left out or edited, and there's reason to think the mission itself was covered up. That's why I'm here. I want to set the record straight. Caroline exchanged a look with Emma, her mouth set in a hard line. Why would they do that? Sometimes, Tessa said quietly. The Army wants to avoid bad press. Or maybe there were political reasons. But I've talked to people who say Sergeant Carter and Valor did more than anyone knows, and paid a higher price than the Army wants to admit. Emma's mind spun. She'd lived with the ache of losing her mom, but now a new ache grew, a hunger to know the full story, even if it hurt. Tessa pulled out a folder, sliding photocopied reports and faded photographs across the table. This is everything I've found so far. Official statements, maps, transcripts. But there's a missing piece. Your mother's unit logs and Valor's full service record. Those were never released to the public. Caroline's eyes narrowed. If you're asking us to drag up the past for a news story. No, Tessa interrupted, gentle but firm. I'm asking for your help to tell the truth. Emma, you and your grandmother are the only ones who can fill in these gaps. You lived it. You have Jamie's journal, Valor's medals, stories from home. If you're willing, I'd like to work together. Emma looked at Caroline, unsure. Her grandmother's jaw clenched. Let's talk about it, in private. Tessa nodded, gathering her things. I'll be in town for a few days. Please think about it. Sometimes the truth needs a little help to see daylight. When Tessa left, the kitchen felt colder. Emma stared at her mother's photo on the mantel. What if there's more to her story? She whispered. Caroline sighed, rubbing her temples. Sometimes the past stays buried for a reason, honey. But I won't let anyone tarnish your mama's name. Emma shook her head. I want to know, Grandma, if they're hiding something, if Mom and Valor did more than anyone knows, people should hear about it. Caroline studied her, then nodded slowly. All right, but we do this on our terms. The next morning, they brought out Jamie's journal, searching for clues. Emma found passages about missions never mentioned in the Army files. Rescues, dangerous patrols, covert operations. There were references to Valor going into places even seasoned soldiers feared to tread. Emma copied these entries into a new notebook, her hands shaking. That evening, a black government SUV pulled up outside the ranch. Two strangers stepped out, a man in a crisp suit, a woman with a military badge. They introduced themselves as Army officials, their voices polite but edged. We understand a reporter has been asking questions about Sergeant Carter's last mission, the man said. Some things are classified for national security. We'd appreciate your discretion. Caroline bristled. My daughter gave everything for her country. If you're hiding the truth, you should be ashamed. The woman's gaze was icy. If any classified information gets released, there could be legal consequences. Emma's blood ran cold. Are you threatening us? The man smiled thinly. We're simply reminding you, national security comes first. After they left, Caroline locked the front door and pulled Emma close. Don't let them scare you. Your mother was never afraid of bullies, and neither are we. But the threats weighed heavily. That night, Emma lay awake, turning the Army's warning over in her mind. Was it dangerous to keep digging? Was her mother's legacy at risk? The next morning, Tessa returned, her voice urgent. I got a call from my editor. Army lawyers contacted the paper. They want the story buried. But if we don't speak up, Jamie's truth will stay hidden forever. Emma took a deep breath. She thought of Valor's scars, her mother's courage, and the lessons she'd learned about standing up for what's right. No, she whispered. We won't let them erase her story. Caroline squeezed her hand. Together. In that moment, Emma understood. Their fight wasn't just for the past. It was for every forgotten hero, every untold sacrifice, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were marked by tension so thick, Emma could almost feel it pressing against her chest. The warning from the Army officials replayed in her mind every time the phone rang or a car slowed down near the ranch. At school, Emma's classmates had caught wind of the rumors. Some whispered encouragement, others only gossiped, but the atmosphere around her changed. She was no longer just the girl with the famous Mustang. She was the daughter fighting to protect her mother's legacy from being erased. At home, Caroline became even more protective, double-checking locks and keeping her phone close at all times. Emma sometimes saw her grandmother staring out the window at night, deep in thought, the old spark of defiance flickering behind her eyes. Tessa Lane, the journalist, refused to give up. She set up camp in a tiny motel room on the edge of sagebrush, her desk overflowing with notebooks, audio recorders, and stacks of evidence. One evening, Emma and Caroline visited her there, the room heavy with the scent of stale coffee and determination. We have to be smart, Tessa said, unrolling a map across the table. The Army can't stop us from gathering the truth, but we need solid proof and voices who can back up Jamie's story. I've tracked down some of her former squad members. They're scattered all over the country, but if we reach out, maybe they'll talk. Caroline nodded, jaw set. I know a few names from Jamie's old letters. They trusted her. They'll trust us. Emma looked at her mother's journal, its pages now peppered with sticky notes and highlighted passages. There's an entry about a medic, Sergeant Lopez. She saved Mom once in a firefight. Maybe she remembers more. That night they made calls, long distance, sometimes awkward, always tense. Some soldiers refused to speak, voices heavy with fear. But a few, men and women who'd once bled and sweated alongside Jamie and Valor, agreed to tell their side. Sergeant Lopez called them back first. Her voice, rough from years of chain smoking, cracked as she recalled the night Valor carried her to safety after an IED blast. Jamie wouldn't leave me. She said, no soldier left behind. Not even you, Lopez. Valor pulled me from the burning Humvee. If the Army says otherwise, they're lying. Emma jotted down every detail, heart pounding. Tessa recorded the testimony, her face alight with hope. A week later, a small group gathered at the Brooks Ranch. 3 of Jamie's former squad members, Tessa, Caroline, Emma, and Valor, standing beneath the wide Texas sky. They swapped stories of battles, loss, and small victories, voices trembling at times, but always returning to the same truth. Jamie Carter and Valor had saved lives, acted with honor, and deserved to be remembered. One night, Tessa arranged a video call with a handler from Valor's military unit. The man appeared on screen in a dim room, his eyes haunted but steady. That horse. He was like a ghost on the battlefield. Never spooked, never ran. There's a reason your mom loved him. He was braver than most men I knew. Piece by piece, Emma and Tessa built a case that was impossible to ignore. They gathered signed statements, old photos, even a shaky cell phone video of Valor dragging a wounded soldier behind a broken wall under heavy fire. With every new bit of evidence, Emma felt her mother's presence more clearly, her courage echoing through each account. The pressure from the army grew. Anonymous letters arrived in the mailbox, warning them to let the dead rest. Men in suits drove by the ranch, watching from a distance. But the town of Sagebrush rallied behind Emma. News spread quickly. Neighbors hung flags in support. Veterans posted on social media, and students at Emma's school started a petition. Honor Sergeant Carter and Valor, tell the truth. Caroline and Emma went to a town meeting at the community center. The room overflowed with people, old cowboys in faded hats, teachers, ranchers, shopkeepers, teenagers holding hand-painted signs. The mayor called them to the front. Caroline spoke first, her voice unwavering. My daughter fought for her country, and now we have to fight for her memory. The army might be big, but this town is bigger when we stand together. Emma stepped to the microphone, hands shaking but chin high. My mom always told me courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're scared. I'm scared now, but I know the truth matters. Valor risked his life for his friends and for her. That shouldn't be forgotten, not ever. The crowd erupted in applause, filling the room with hope. The local news covered the event. And soon Emma and Caroline were receiving calls from other towns. Veterans, Gold Star families, people who'd lost loved ones to war and bureaucracy, all wanting to help. Tessa finished her article, weaving together the testimonies, evidence, and Emma's own words. She sent it to her editor with a note. Run this no matter what they threaten. The truth belongs to everyone. On the eve of publication, the army called Tessa's paper again, demanding silence. But this time, they were ignored. The next morning, the story broke online and in print. The Mustang and the Sergeant. What really happened in Afghanistan? Within hours, the story was trending. Messages poured in. Gratitude, outrage, support. The Army's legal threats made headlines too, and public pressure mounted for a full investigation. Emma, Caroline, and Valor became symbols of resilience and truth. But for Emma, the real victory was something quieter. Knowing she'd honored her mother's sacrifice and proved, once and for all, that even the smallest voices can change the world. And as she stood with Caroline and Valor under the rising Texas sun, Emma felt the fear finally give way to courage. In the wake of Tessa's article, Sagebrush felt like a town reborn. The Brooks Ranch received a steady stream of phone calls, letters, and even hand-delivered notes from people across Texas and beyond. Emma's inbox overflowed with messages, thank yous from veterans, apologies from old classmates, and stories from strangers who'd been inspired to stand up for their own truths. The story of Sergeant Jamie Carter and Valor had become a beacon, igniting something fierce and hopeful in the hearts of everyone who heard it. But the spotlight brought new burdens too. The Army's headquarters released a statement. The Department of the Army is reviewing the matter with respect for all who served. It was neither an apology nor an admission. For days, rumors swirled that the Army would show up in Sagebrush with their own version of the truth, determined to protect their reputation. Reporters camped outside the ranch, their vans crowding the dirt road. Through it all, Caroline stayed steady, her presence a wall between Emma and the chaos. One evening, as a late summer thunderstorm rolled in, the mayor of Sagebrush called the Brooks House. The town council wanted to hold a public event, a town hall open to everyone, to honor Jamie and Valor and let the community hear directly from the family. Emma's first instinct was to say no. The idea of facing a crowd, of sharing her mother's story again, this time with cameras rolling, made her stomach twist. But Caroline placed a firm hand on her shoulder. "Emma, you're the only one who can speak for your mom now. And Valor, well, he's already shown everyone what a hero looks like." Emma nodded, swallowing her nerves. If her mom could face the enemy in the desert, she could face a few hundred people in Sagebrush. The next week, the community center overflowed. People packed the parking lot, spilled onto the lawn, waving flags and banners. Some wore army green, others cowboy hats and boots, but all stood united in the humid twilight. TV crews set up their lights. The old church choir sang "America the Beautiful." At the center of it all stood Emma, Caroline, and Valor, calm and dignified, the Mustang's mane freshly brushed and medals shining. The mayor began the ceremony with a brief speech about truth, honor, and the courage to speak up. Then he turned the microphone over to Emma, who clutched her mother's journal in trembling hands. The crowd hushed as she took her place at the podium, Valor standing beside her, one big, steady presence. "My mom always said heroes don't ask for medals," Emma began, voice quiet but clear. "Sometimes they never get recognized at all." She paused, searching the faces in the crowd. Her classmates, her teachers, veterans, families she'd never met, all watching and waiting. But heroes do what's right, even if it means no one ever knows their name. My mom was brave, but Valor. He was her partner, her friend, her hope. He saved lives. He gave everything. Emma read a passage from her mother's journal, her voice catching on the words about courage and loneliness, about the fear of not coming home. The crowd listened in silence, tears glistening on weathered cheeks and young faces alike. After she finished, Caroline spoke next, her words simple and powerful. "This town took care of us when the world turned its back. We're here to honor every soldier and every animal who gave their best, even when nobody was watching. Jamie and Valor are a part of this place, now and forever." A hush fell. Then, from the back of the room, a group of veterans rose to their feet. One by one, they came forward, shaking Emma's hand, some saluting Valor with tears in their eyes. The principal presented a plaque to Emma. "In honor of Sergeant Jamie Carter and Valor for courage beyond measure." The Army officials, pressed by public outrage and the weight of evidence, finally took the stage. In front of the cameras and townspeople, they acknowledged Jamie's heroism and Valor's service, reading an official citation that listed the details once left out. Her rescues, her leadership, Valor's acts of bravery under fire. There was no more talk of classified files or legal threats. Instead, the Army rep pinned a new medal on Valor's halter and handed Caroline a formal letter of apology. Emma felt her breath catch as she watched Valor, older now, eyes wise and calm, raise his hoof in a final salute. The room fell silent, then someone started to clap, and soon the applause thundered, rising to the rafters. Afterward, people hugged Emma and Caroline, pressed flowers into their hands, and took pictures with Valor. Even Dylan and her friends approached quietly, offering real apologies and shy smiles. Sagebrush had become a family, united by a story of loss, courage, and redemption. That night, as the town hall emptied, Emma lingered with Valor under the stars. The Mustang's steps were slower, but his spirit was as strong as ever. Caroline joined her, and together they walked home, arm in arm, the echo of applause still ringing in their ears. Emma knew the fight had cost them a sense of privacy, the comfort of quiet grief, but it had also given them something new. A community awakened, an old wrong set right, and her mother's name spoken with pride, not as a shadow or a secret. Back at the ranch, Valor stood in his paddock, watching the horizon as if searching for Jamie. Emma reached up, resting her cheek against his mane, whispering, "Thank you for everything." As dawn crept across the Texas fields, the Brooks family felt the healing power of recognition settle over them like a blessing, knowing they'd done justice to the truth and to the memories that would live on long after the applause faded. After the night of the town hall, sagebrush settled into a gentle reverence for the Brooks family and their Mustang. The story of Sergeant Jamie Carter and Valor had spread across Texas and beyond, inspiring people from all walks of life. Emma noticed the change everywhere she went. At school, in the diner, even at the feed store where strangers now greeted her like an old friend. The once lonely ache of loss was now colored with pride, but a new heaviness crept into Emma's days. Valor was slowing down. It started with small things. Valor took longer to come in from the pasture. His steps grew more measured, his once vivid eyes a bit cloudier each morning. Emma spent every free moment with him, brushing his coat, reading him her mother's journal entries, and singing softly as she braided wildflowers into his mane. Caroline watched closely, hiding her worry behind gentle encouragement and extra handfuls of oats. One warm afternoon, a letter arrived at the ranch. The return address read, "United States Army." With trembling hands, Caroline opened it while Emma hovered at her side. The letter was an official offer. The Army wanted to award Valor and Jamie a national commendation, recognizing them both as inseparable partners in courage. They planned a ceremony in Austin, a grand event with press coverage, generals, and speeches. Emma's chest tightened as she read the words. It was what they had fought for. But something felt unfinished. That evening, Emma sat on the back porch, Valor grazing nearby. She traced the old scars on his shoulder, thinking about all he'd endured. "He's not just my mom's partner," Emma whispered. "He's family. If we accept, it can't just be for Valor and Jamie. There were so many animals, so many forgotten heroes." Caroline came and sat beside her, their silence deep and easy. "You're right," she finally said. "Your mom would want every war horse, every working dog remembered. Let's make sure their stories get told too." The days passed in a golden blur as the Army's event drew near, but Valor's health faded quickly. One morning, Emma found him lying beneath the old oak tree, breathing slow and shallow. Caroline called the vet, who arrived with gentle hands and a quiet voice. "He's lived a long, brave life," the vet said, looking from Emma to Caroline. "All you can do now is make him comfortable." Emma nodded, biting her lip. She and Caroline set up a bed of straw and soft blankets under the oak. Friends and neighbors came by in a steady stream, offering carrots, apples, and quiet words. Veterans in uniform saluted Valor one last time. Kids from Emma's class sang him songs, some placing drawings and handmade medals around his neck. As night fell, Emma sat beside Valor, cradling his head in her lap. She read aloud from Jamie's journal, her voice trembling but steady. The last entry read, "If you're reading this, take care of Valor for me. He's carried me through more than any soldier could ask, and he's family. Heroes don't last forever, but love does. Wherever I am, I'll be waiting for you both. Mom tears ran down Emma's cheeks as she pressed her forehead to Valor's. I love you, she whispered. You're my hero too. As the dawn crept over the horizon, Valor's breathing slowed, then finally stopped. The ranch was silent, the world holding its breath. Emma wrapped her arms around the Mustang's neck, grief crashing over her in waves. Caroline knelt beside her, pulling her close, and for a long time, they simply sat together under the spreading branches of the oak. News of Valor's passing spread fast. That afternoon, the town gathered for a memorial beneath the old tree. Emma watched as people placed flowers, medals, and photographs around the mound of earth where Valor rested beside Jamie's favorite riding boots. Veterans shared stories of the animals who'd saved their lives: war dogs, mules, even pigeons. The principal read a poem about courage. The mayor declared it Valor Day in Sagebrush. The Army's delegation arrived, subdued and respectful. At Emma's insistence, the national commendation was awarded not just to Jamie and Valor, but in the name of all forgotten military animals. A plaque was unveiled beside the oak tree, etched with the words, "In memory of all who served." Human and animal. Courage knows no boundaries. Caroline gave a speech that echoed through the fields. Some heroes never come home, but their spirit lives on. Valor and Jamie are together now, but their story will keep fighting for truth and kindness, long after we're gone. Emma stood before the town, clutching Valor's halter in her hands. She tried to find words big enough to hold her grief, her gratitude, and her love. My mom taught me to stand up for the truth, Emma said, voice shaking. Valor taught me to never give up, even when it hurts. If you ever doubt you're strong enough, remember them, remember all of them, because they'll never really leave us. As the sun set, the community held a moment of silence, broken only by the soft whinny of a colt in a nearby pasture, a promise that life, even after the hardest loss, would go on. Back at the house, Emma laid Jamie's journal and Valor's last medal side by side on her windowsill. She whispered goodnight, certain that somewhere, her mother and Valor were together again, running free, wild, and unbroken, under a sky that stretched forever. And though grief still lived in the quiet places of her heart, Emma felt something new growing there too, a fierce and shining hope that would carry her and their story into the days ahead. The weeks after Valor's memorial moved quietly, as if sagebrush itself was holding a gentle, collective breath. Emma felt both emptier and braver. The town's support was steady. Neighbors checked in, friends from school sent cards and homemade cookies, veterans dropped by the ranch with stories about their own war buddies, both human and animal. But the world kept spinning, and so did Emma. Her days were still colored by loss, but now there was a new current running beneath it, a sense of purpose that wouldn't let her stay small or silent. Emma's story, and that of Jamie and Valor, had rippled out far beyond the borders of Sagebrush. Veterans groups, animal advocacy organizations, and news outlets reached out. Some wanted interviews, others wanted to thank her, and more than a few wanted her to help them change the world for forgotten heroes. At first, Emma hesitated. She was just a kid. Who would listen to her? But each letter, each phone call, reminded her that the truth could stretch farther than fear ever could. One afternoon, as golden sunlight spilled through the kitchen window, Caroline placed an envelope on the table. "You've got an invitation, kiddo," she said, voice gruff but proud. "They want you to speak at the state capitol. Share Valor's story with lawmakers and veterans. Maybe even help get a bill passed to recognize military animals officially. Emma blinked at the letter, heart pounding. A year ago, she never would have imagined standing up in front of politicians and generals, let alone trying to change the law. But now, something inside her felt ready to fight for Valor, for her mother, and for every animal that never made it home. With Carolyn's steady hand on her shoulder, Emma began writing her speech. She dug deep, drawing from the words in Jamie's journal, her own experiences, and the lessons grief had etched into her bones. She talked about Valor's courage, Jamie's sacrifice, and the loneliness of being doubted. She spoke of finding her voice in the silence after loss, and how telling the truth, even when no one wants to hear it, is the bravest thing anyone can do. At the Capitol, Emma faced a sea of unfamiliar faces, lawmakers, veterans in dress blues, reporters clutching notepads. The room was silent as she stepped to the podium, her speech clutched in trembling hands. But as she began, the words flowed with a quiet certainty, shaped by love and hard-won strength. Valor wasn't just my mom's horse, Emma said, her voice ringing clear. He was her partner, her friend, and a soldier in his own right. My mom always said courage is about doing the right thing, even when you're scared. I was scared to speak up, scared no one would listen. But if you have a story that matters, you have to share it. You have to fight for what's right, even when it hurts. She talked about the bond between soldiers and their animals, the wounds that don't show on the outside, and how recognizing those sacrifices could help heal both people and communities. By the time she finished, more than a few lawmakers were wiping their eyes. When the vote came up weeks later, the new bill passed with overwhelming support. Military animals in Texas would be honored alongside their human counterparts, their stories woven into the state's legacy. After that day, invitations flooded in. Schools, veterans events, even TV interviews. Emma found herself becoming a kind of advocate. She traveled with Caroline to community centers and small-town gatherings, sharing what she'd learned. Sometimes she spoke to packed auditoriums, sometimes to a single classroom, but always with Valor's story at the heart of every word. In each speech, Emma wove in lessons that had taken her months, even years, to learn. That it's okay to miss someone so much it aches, as long as you keep moving forward. That real bravery is gentle as much as it's strong. That the truth is worth fighting for, especially when the world tries to bury it. Caroline watched her granddaughter grow into her calling. Quietly proud, but always ready to step in when Emma faltered. At home, they spent long evenings on the porch, Carolyn sharing memories of Jamie, Emma scribbling new stories in her own journal. The ranch, once a place of shadows, now felt full of hope. Emma began to help draft proposals for a national military animal recognition program. She worked with Tessa Lane and other advocates, collecting stories and testimonies. Sometimes, the weight of responsibility felt heavy. She missed the old quiet, the easy days with Valor, but she knew this was her legacy too. On the anniversary of Valor's passing, Sagebrush hosted a remembrance ceremony under the oak tree. People traveled from across the state carrying photos, medals, and handwritten letters to lost animals. A new bench, carved with the words service, loyalty, courage, was placed by Valor's grave. Emma stood before the crowd, hands folded over Jamie's journal. She spoke not just of loss, but of how grief could shape a new path forward, one built on honesty and kindness. She encouraged others, especially the kids, to never doubt the power of their own voices. Sometimes I still miss my mom and Valor so much, it feels like I can't breathe, Emma admitted, the wind rustling through her hair. But I know I'm not alone anymore. And I know that every time I tell their story, I keep their love alive. That's what real legacy means. Afterward, as the sun set, Caroline pulled Emma into a hug. "Your mama would be so proud," she whispered, her own voice thick with tears. Emma looked around at the gathered crowd, at friends, neighbors, and even strangers who'd become part of her journey, and knew the lessons of truth, courage, and love would stay with her forever. And as she walked home beneath the endless Texas sky, Emma promised herself she would keep fighting, keep speaking, and keep believing, because her family's legacy was now her own. A full year had passed since Valor's last sunrise, and Sagebrush wore the memory with quiet pride. The world felt different, brighter somehow, as if the truth Emma fought for had settled deep into the town's bones. Life went on. Seasons changed. New foals kicked up dust in the pastures, and Emma grew taller, her voice stronger. But every day she carried her mother and Valor with her, their lessons shaping every step. On a sunlit morning, the Brooks family dressed in their best. The air buzzed with anticipation. The town was unveiling a new monument at Texas Veterans Park, a place where names carved in granite told the stories of sacrifice and honor. This time, 2 new names would join them: Sergeant Jamie Carter and Valor. Caroline drove, hands steady on the wheel, but Emma could see the glint of tears in her grandmother's eyes. The radio played quietly, country music and news about the ceremony. Emma watched the land roll by, wildflowers swaying along the highway, the sky stretching wide and blue. She clutched Jamie's journal in her lap, Valor's old medal strung around her neck, heart beating a little faster with each passing mile. The park was already full when they arrived. Reporters set up cameras, kids waved small flags, and rows of veterans in crisp uniforms stood at attention. The new monument shone in the morning sun, polished stone with words etched deep: Sergeant Jamie Carter and Valor, partners in courage. At its base, bouquets of wildflowers and hand-drawn cards piled high. Emma traced her fingers over the inscription, feeling the cold stone, the permanence of memory. As the crowd settled, the mayor took the stage, welcoming everyone and sharing how Jamie and Valor's story had changed the town and the state. He talked about the new laws inspired by Emma's testimony, the way children now learned about animal heroes in their classrooms, and how Sagebrush had become a symbol of courage that rippled out far beyond its borders. Then it was Emma's turn. She stepped forward, her voice steady but her hands trembling just a little. She looked out at the sea of faces, her friends, her teachers, strangers who'd become family, and took a deep breath. "A year ago, I was just a kid who missed her mom and her horse," Emma began. "I didn't think my voice could matter, but I learned that real heroes aren't always believed at first, and the truth isn't always easy to tell." She paused, letting the words settle. Sometimes it means people laugh at you, or you have to stand alone in a hallway or a crowded room. But if you hold on to the truth, if you fight for it, the world changes. She spoke of Valor's bravery, of Jamie's sacrifice, of the little ways courage shows up in ordinary life. A hand reached out to help. A story told even when you're scared. A neighbor standing beside you when things get hard. She talked about family, how love makes us strong, how legacy isn't just a story in a book, but something we live every day. Courage means standing up for what's right. Even if you're the only one, Emma continued, her voice clear. But it also means listening, forgiving, and letting others change. Because sometimes, the world just needs someone to remind it what's possible. She glanced at Caroline, who smiled through tears, her pride shining. Emma finished, her words soft but sure. My mom and Valor taught me that hope is a choice we make, not just a feeling. And even when it seems like all is lost, love will carry us through. The crowd erupted in applause, long and loud, a celebration that echoed through the park and beyond. Reporters snapped photos, children rushed forward to lay their drawings at the monument's base, and veterans tipped their hats in respect. After the ceremony, Emma was approached by a group of young kids from a nearby elementary school. One, a shy boy with freckles, tugged at her sleeve. "My dad says you're the bravest person he's ever met," he whispered. "I want to be brave too." Emma knelt to his level, smiling. "Being brave isn't about not being scared," she said, repeating her mother's wisdom. "It's about doing what's right. Even if your voice shakes, even if you stand alone. And you'll never really be alone. Not if you're honest and kind." As the crowd drifted away, Emma and Caroline lingered by the monument. They laid wildflowers and Valor's last medal at its base, then stood in silence as the sun rose higher. Caroline placed a gentle arm around Emma's shoulders. "You did it, Emma. You gave them a legacy that'll last," she murmured, "and you gave this town hope." Emma looked up at the sky, feeling the warmth of the sun, the steady strength of her grandmother beside her, and the love that still lived, fierce and undimmed, in her heart. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined Jamie and Valor, together, running wild under a sky that never ended, free and whole. Life settled into its new rhythm. Emma visited the park often, sharing stories with visitors, answering questions, and sometimes just sitting quietly with her memories. She kept writing, her mother's journal joined by her own, filled with lessons learned, joys celebrated, and the promise to keep telling the truth, no matter how hard. As years passed, Emma watched new generations play beneath the oaks, daring each other to be as brave as Valor, to stand as tall as Jamie. The monument weathered sun and rain, but its message stayed strong, that love, courage, and truth endure, shining out for anyone who needs them. On the anniversary of the monument's unveiling, Emma and Caroline laid fresh flowers and stood together in the dawn. The sun rose, soft, golden, unyielding, and for Emma it was proof that hope, once planted, could never truly die. She whispered, "Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Valor. I'll carry you with me always." And with that, she faced the future, heart full, head high, and legacy burning bright, ready to inspire all who came after.